Well, you've seen her on Fox 2, on Channel 7, and right here on the Megacast. Now she is co-hosting the new podcast, CrimeCasters, along with Alicia Safias. Ronnie Dahl joins us now on the Megacast. Ronnie, welcome back.
Hey, Tyler, how are you? You know, it is crazy because we got to talk with so many people, and you kind of miss that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to continue to meet some new people, talk to some familiar faces, see how things are changing, and new things that are coming up in Oakland County and all across the state of Michigan over time. You got some new things coming up already underway with your new podcast, CrimeCasters. You can learn more information on CrimeCastersNetwork.com. Taking a little bit different approach to investigative journalism without the constraints of mainstream media, of mainstream news. Tell us about CrimeCasters and then how that freedom from those constraints helps you better tell these stories.
Well, Alicia and I had worked together years ago in Lansing. We don't want to count the years because then you might be able to figure out how old we are. But a few years ago, she actually came to me. So we left Lansing. I stayed in the Michigan area. She went to California, and while she was out there, she was working, I think, for a cannabis company doing PR and pitching some reality shows. And all the producers were like, true crime. Do you have anything true crime? What about true crime? And she had pitched the idea of reporters going back and reinvestigating some of the stories that they covered as reporters. And she had approached me at that time, but I was working for ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And so I wasn't able to do it at that time. And so she moved back to Michigan during the pandemic because her parents are here and she got married. And so the stars kind of aligned. And that's why we joined forces. And one of them being is you're looking at the cases that we covered as reporters. And there are always those cases that stick with you. When your general assignment, and even in the investigative world, and journalism has changed considerably over the years as well. And you go out and you're turning 2-3 stories a day. So you have no time. Like the deadline pressure that reporters are under really is crazy. But these stories and the families stick with you. So we came up with the CrimeCasters Network, and in the beginning, we're going to revisit some of the cases that we covered as reporters and kind of take a deeper look at them. And, you know, it's crazy because in a newscast, anyone who's out there, like if you time a story, we call them packages, right? Where a reporter actually goes and tracks and interview people, and you put it together as called a package. Most packages that air on the, evening news, they're like 1:15. If you're investigative, you might get a little bit more time and you can maybe do 2.5-3 minutes, and then you're begging for that time. Our podcast is about 35-40 minutes on each case. And it's crazy because even then we're like, we don't have enough time. And to think like, how do we put this story in 2.5-3 minutes? And now 30 minutes isn't enough time. So it really gives you a chance to kind of dig deeper and look at the cases, look at the stories, and reinvestigate, and also re-interview people involved as well.
It's a wonderful source. What type of things have you found through doing this? What have you found out in your true crimes adventure?
Well, and, sadly, we have so many cases. Like for me, being in Detroit, there are so many. So the two that I started off with, one for me was just the Deandre Lane case. Bianca Jones is still missing, and she has yet to be legally declared dead. And the Detroit Police Department also considers her case an open case. And yet her father has been convicted of her murder and is serving life in prison without the chance of parole. How has that happened? And I covered the story. I covered it, multiple times as a reporter. In fact, had the first interview with Deandre after Bianca went missing. And are there questions that don't line up even today in my mind? Yes. But I think the case needs to be relooked at because I don't think there was enough evidence to convict him of life in prison. And when you look at these no body cases, you really start to look into them. he has such a rare situation in that we're looking at the time frame. Most people convicted of no body cases, and that being that no body has been found, there's a lot of them domestic violence or, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. And we're talking about weeks or days in between. In Deandre Lane's case, you're looking at a window of 20, 30 minutes that they can't account for. And so that raises questions. But so it's been interesting to kind of, you dig deeper into the situation. Time has a way of opening up people to talk a little bit more. And we did speak to Deandre from prison about kind of what he is going through. I don't think he ever thought he was going to be convicted. That's for certain.
We're joined by Ronnie Dahl from the CrimeCasters Network. Learn more information about their podcast, CrimeCastersNetwork.com. And just continuing on with the stories such as this, such as the Bianca Jones story, the Deandre Lane story. There are so many layers to this. There's so many different paths that your mind kind of goes as you hear this story, as you're listening to the podcast, as you're diving deeper, considering all the what ifs. If this happened, then where could Bianca be if she still is alive? If she was murdered and it wasn't Deandre Lane, who was it? Was she abducted? There's so many different paths and so many different avenues that you can explore that are their own individual stories. Having not had those time constraints, you've already spoken on that, but just being able to continuously follow up for you as a journalist and to continue to tell these people's stories when often they're told once, maybe twice on a newscast and then seemingly go away. For you as a journalist, how fulfilling is that to continue to be able to look back at these stories, reopen these stories, and tell them in full or as full as they can be?
It's satisfying, but on the other side, in certain ways, it's just as frustrating because there are so many answers or so many unanswered questions that you're trying to find out. But on the backside of that, we do know that people have started to open up to this whole true crime world, including law enforcement. And I think that's been kind of the changing game in all of this, that they understand that you need the public's help. The public has to help you with those answers or get those questions answered. And that's what we need to happen here. And, one of the theories with the Bianca Jones case is that possibly someone connected to the mother's side of the family had her. She was in North Carolina. I can tell you at one point in time when I was a reporter, I tried to go to North Carolina to look into this. So it isn't just so much a Michigan case. This could really be a national case. So maybe it is something where a person in another part of the country knows something about it. And there is such a following in the true crime podcast world that they're helping to solve these cases. And I think as we go on, you're finding law enforcement is a little bit more open to exploring these avenues. We even saw it here locally when Megan Lehman was with the Troy Police Department. She had a cold case that she put out on their social media page, and, really trying to get the public interested to help them fill in those blanks that they need in order to make an arrest and get justice for these families.
So often people don't know what they saw, and they need to step forward and say something. And just to help that little edge, that little bit of edge with DNA now, and oh my God, what that's done to solve so many cases is just unbelievable.
Yeah. One of the things that's been interesting, though, is seeing the response from the different departments on some of the different cases. Because if it's a cold case, some departments are willing to open up those files. Others are not. They'll say, oh, it's still an ongoing investigation. I'm looking into a case of a missing mother in Flint. She's been gone for more than 20 years, but yet they won't release any of the documents or any of the files. But I've had other cases where they've opened them. Because of our investigation, though, one of the first cases that my co-host, Alicia Sabias, went after was the Bernita White case out of Lansing. And that was one that, at the time it made big headlines, but has kind of just sat. And what that was is you had a mother walking into the zoo with her 5-year-old daughter when she is struck by a bullet and killed. They believe it was a sniper, one bullet, and she died, while her husband has long been the suspect, and he is, or was, he's retired now, a Michigan State Police trooper. And one of the things that we have found, we put in a FOIA request. For those that don't know, a FOIA is Freedom of Information Act, and you can put in a request for the documents. That case sat cold forever. And then after we put in the FOIA request and started really making a lot of phone calls, and this is kind of where that relationship that I had with ATF comes into play, because law enforcement's not always so media friendly. And my time with ATF, I understand it. I really do. And there are some members of the media that I didn't appreciate what they did as well. And so in having these relationships with law enforcement, we were pretty much up against a brick wall. And then because I had a relationship with people in the office there with ATF, then they can vouch for me as a reporter that will kind of do the right thing on these cases. But the good thing is they have reopened the case. The bad thing is our FOIA request that was initially granted ended up being denied because they've reopened it. And so we could see an arrest in that case, hopefully within the next few months.
That's great to hear, and it's great to hear that these stories are getting that focus that they deserve, that they don't often get beyond when they are airing or in the initial period after they air on mainstream news. We're joined by Ronnie Dahl from the CrimeCasters Network. More information on their podcast, CrimeCastersNetwork.com. And you mentioned FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. Often those can be very expensive depending on the extent of what documents you're trying to get. You've talked about this numerous times while hosting the Megacast over here. On your website, there's a link to donate to the CrimeCasters Freedom of Information Act Fund. Just how important are those donations to that fund, to being able to open you and open Alicia and your team up to be able to get those critical documents that can help to be those pinpoints in telling these stories?
Well, it's so interesting for anyone that that applies to get some of these documents. And just so people know too, the FOIA is not for reporters or attorneys. It's for all of us. I mean, we're regular people. They are our documents. And what they're saying is there is a cost associated to them and producing them and then redacting them. So for example, when we first put in the FOIA for the Bernita White case and it was approved initially, I think the cost was $42,000. And at that time we were working with ABC, the network, on that case, and they were willing to help us fund that case. But then eventually those documents got denied. So they can get quite costly. But we also know that the answers are typically in the documents and they can fill in those gaps. And so that's why it really is so important. And, for people to know, like, we're self-funded, like, this is, we're going in, putting in our savings, trying to make this happen until we can get it up and going, because we do believe that there are answers out there. One of the other ones that's close to us here in the West Bloomfield area is the Javelin Murders. They actually happened in New Baltimore, but Steve Kaplan, the West Bloomfield Township Supervisor, was actually the assistant Macomb County prosecutor who worked on that case. He prosecuted it, and I interviewed him for the Javelin Murders, which has been interesting. And then trying to talk to the family members throughout this period and getting, the take from a prosecutor, the detective, but the family members, and then trying to go dig through the courthouse and uncover some of these old documents from a 1985 arrest that we had for Ron Sr., which one of the family members believes is connected to the case. Obviously, the prosecutor and the detective, they do not.
So much of, solving these crimes comes down to, like I said, finding the person that just happened to look at and see a car go by, and there's nothing to that. But yet, if they said something, even the color of a vehicle at a certain time that goes by can help so much in solving these problems. It's those little, like you're saying, fill in those little gaps.
Exactly, because we don't think about it. We've done that. And one of the cases in the Javelin was a neighbor who was a truck driver came home late at night and was like clearing out his truck, and he noticed that the lights were not on at the Javelin home where they usually were. He goes into his house, he comes home from, a job, goes into the house, then he comes out to his truck, and then he sees a truck leave, and then the lights are on, and it's about 1 a.m. So those little things that we don't think about could actually be the key to solving some of these cases.
We're joined by Ronnie Dahl from the CrimeCasters Network podcast. Learn more information about the podcast on their website, CrimeCastersNetwork.com. Ronnie, another couple minutes with you before we'll need to say goodbye. Before we do, tell us where we can find your podcasts and also about how often our new episodes going to be coming out.
So we are pretty much anywhere a podcast. You get your podcast, like I'm an Apple person, so I get them on Apple. You can get it Spotify, Google. They're everywhere. But of course, people can listen on the website as well, CrimeCastersNetwork.com. And that's also where we put additional information, like the documents from the court case I was talking about in the Javelin case. You can go on there and find those 1985 court documents. So really pretty much anywhere anyone wants to listen to one. And we just launched in February. So we now have 4 episodes up. Once we kind of get into a routine and a rhythm, it'll be 1 to 2 cases a week because they take time to investigate. We have some that's kind of, backlogged right now because we started working on this 6-7 months ago. So 1 a week, and then it's just a balancing act of trying to look at these cases and, put in a FOIA on this one. And while you're waiting on this one, hey, what about this one? And for everyone in Oakland County, for me, because this is my home, one of the ones that I'm digging into right now that we hope to have soon is going to be the Stuart case out of Kiko Harbor. And that was the murder-suicide with the family. It made big headlines back in 2018 when it happened, but digging into it a lot deeper, there's so much more to the family and the Jehovah Witness Church. I think a lot of people are going to find that one interesting.
Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about this new podcast.
It's great having you guys. Miss you. Thanks for having us.